To truly grasp how this false belief, that red states are the primary financial drivers of the country, became so widely accepted, we need to look at the cultural and political forces that allowed it to spread unchecked. This myth didn't form in a vacuum. It is the product of years of partisan messaging, political posturing, and, in many cases, a deliberate rejection of nuanced facts in favor of emotionally charged sound bites. When J.D. Vance repeated the claim that red states pay the bills, he wasn't just offering an economic opinion. He was reinforcing a storyline designed to suggest moral superiority, that conservative states, by virtue of their values and policies, are more productive, more self-sufficient, and more worthy of leading the nation. But the data tells another story entirely, one that Jasmine Crockett exposed with clarity. Understanding federal taxation and spending is essential to challenging this myth. The federal tax system is progressive, meaning that individuals and corporations with higher incomes pay more in taxes. Blue states tend to have higher incomes, higher property values, and more corporate profits, and thus they pay a disproportionate share of federal taxes. This isn't because of political ideology, but because of economic structure. New York and California, for instance, are global economic hubs. Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, major ports, and international corporations all funnel enormous revenue through these states. Naturally, their residents pay more in taxes. When that money is pooled federally, it's redistributed to areas with greater needs. That's not a flaw in the system, it's the point of the system. Federalism is built on the idea of shared responsibility, of lifting each other up. But when politicians like Vance twist that into a weapon, implying that the givers are takers and the takers are victims, it corrodes public understanding. One of the key ways we can evaluate the relationship between tax contribution and benefit is through the balance of payments analysis. This shows whether a state gets back more or less in federal spending than it contributes. According to data compiled by the Rockefeller Institute of Government, year after year, states like Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Jersey pay far more than they receive. On the other hand, states like Mississippi, West Virginia, and Kentucky receive significantly more than they pay. This is not to shame those states. Poverty, underinvestment, and economic decline are real challenges. Many red states, especially in the South and Appalachia, have long histories of economic hardship. The solution isn't to point fingers, but it is to stop pretending that those who rely more heavily on federal assistance are the ones doing all the financial heavy lifting. Jasmine Crockett made this distinction clear when she stated that acknowledging economic reality isn't about creating division, it's about forming policy grounded in truth. When people believe they are subsidizing others, it can lead to resentment. But when they realize they are, in fact, beneficiaries of shared national wealth, it should foster humility and cooperation. Another layer to this conversation is the issue of state-level policy decisions. Many red states reject programs like Medicaid expansion, resist raising the minimum wage, and underinvest in public education. As a result, they rely more on federal grants to fill the gaps. This isn't just an abstract debate, it has real consequences for millions of Americans. When a state chooses not to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, its poorest residents are left without health care. But the federal government still steps in through emergency services, disability coverage, veterans' health programs, and hospital funding. So even when states reject federal programs for political reasons, they often still benefit from other streams of federal money. Crockett pointed to a stark example. Texas, her home state, has one of the highest rates of uninsured people in the nation. It also refused to expand Medicaid. Yet it receives enormous federal funding for uncompensated care through hospitals and emergency medical services. That's federal money making up for a state-level ideological decision. This disconnect between rhetoric and reality is dangerous. Politicians tell their constituents they are independent and self-sufficient while quietly relying on federal dollars to survive. The people living in those states are often unaware that their roads, schools, and hospitals are being funded by tax dollars from Californians and New Yorkers. And when they're told the opposite, that they're the ones footing the bill, it breeds a sense of grievance and injustice. J.D. Vance's comment didn't emerge from nowhere. It's part of a larger campaign to recast American economics into a culture war narrative. Blue states are painted as lazy, bloated, and immoral. Red states are framed as lean, hardworking, and God-fearing. But this narrative collapses under scrutiny. If red states are truly the economic engine, why did they consistently rank lower in health outcomes, education funding, infrastructure quality, and average income? Why did they rely so heavily on federal support to balance their budgets? Why did they have higher poverty rates and lower workforce participation? These are questions Jasmine Crockett didn't ask rhetorically. She backed them up with data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Department of Labor, the Census Bureau, and the Congressional Budget Office. The figures she presented were clear, consistent, and undeniable. The facts show that states with more progressive tax policies, more investments in education and healthcare, and stronger safety nets tend to produce higher economic output per capita. Their residents live longer, earn more, and contribute more in federal taxes. This isn't a partisan argument, it's a measurable trend. Yet despite this, politicians like J.D. Vance continue to push a narrative rooted not in economics but in identity politics. They know that emotion often trumps reason in public discourse. So instead of addressing the real structural challenges facing rural and southern communities, they redirect blame outward, toward immigrants, toward urban elites, and toward progressive states. This tactic isn't new. It's been used for generations. But what made Jasmine's response so powerful was that she refused to play that game. She didn't attack red states or their people. She defended the truth. She defended the dignity of facts in a political environment that increasingly treats facts as optional. And the implications of this truth go far beyond a Senate hearing room. They shape how federal budgets are crafted. They shape how voters perceive fairness and justice. They determine whether we fund climate response initiatives, school lunch programs, broadband expansion, and veterans care. When people like J.D. Vance distort the economic relationship between states, they aren't just misleading the public. They're undermining the case for mutual investment. They're making it harder for us to act collectively in the face of national challenges. Whether it's a hurricane in Florida, a flood in Missouri, wildfires in California, or opioid addiction in West Virginia, these are American problems that require American solutions. They require a shared pool of resources and a shared commitment to each other. The federal government exists because the framers of the Constitution understood that states acting alone would not be able to manage the needs of a growing, interconnected country. That's why we have federal highways, federal disaster aid, federal research funding, federal health programs. Because we are stronger together than we are apart. Jasmine Crockett's statement in the Senate wasn't just a fact check. It was a defense of the American idea that we do not abandon each other, especially not by distorting the truth to score political points. And as she concluded her remarks, she reminded the room of this principle: it's not about blue or red. It's about the truth. And the truth is, we all rely on each other. So let's stop pretending otherwise. The moment reverberated beyond the chamber. Clips of her speech went viral. Economists, journalists, and civic leaders praised her for her clarity and courage. But more importantly, it prompted a broader conversation. It made people ask questions. Is my state really paying more than it gets? Is my neighbor in another state actually subsidizing my school? Am I believing a myth because it makes me feel better? These are the kinds of questions democracy depends on. Because a functioning democracy requires an informed public. And an informed public cannot exist when myths go unchallenged. That's why Jasmine's words mattered. Not because they embarrassed J.D. Vance. But because they told the truth, plain, sharp, and unavoidable. And the truth is this: America's economic engine is complex. It's not divided cleanly by red or blue, north or south. It is woven together by 1,000 threads of industry, labor, innovation, and investment. Some threads are stronger, some are frayed. But they are all connected. The moment we pretend otherwise is the moment we risk tearing the whole fabric apart. So the next time someone says, red states pay the bills, remember what Jasmine Crockett said in that chamber. And remember the data. Because facts may not always win the headlines. But they still matter. They still shape lives. And they still have the power to silence a lie, when spoken with courage, and backed by truth.